Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is a oral history interview conducted on Saturday, April 19th at 4:30 p.m. 2014. We are interviewing Bayan
Hamad.
Interviewed by Abbas Barzagar and Zainab Ansari. Okay, so why don't you just go and get started by telling us a little bit of your biographical, sort of background, your information, where you were born, where you grew up, and sort of your encounters and interactions with Islam growing up in sort of your life.
Well, I was born in Dominica, actually, in 1980. Traveled around quite a bit throughout my life. Actually lived in Honduras for a time. Lived in Belize. I've lived in the United States. I've lived in St. Croix, Trinidad and Tobago. Where else? Antigua for a second. So we traveled quite a bit. And everywhere we went, we had our Islamic circle. It was a number of families that went to these different locations. So, we grew up in an Islamic society, an Islamic community, but just we did bounce around quite a bit.
What community was that?
The Islamic, we wouldn't call it the Islamic Party. What we called it was New Medina, is what my father called it. So everywhere we went, he wanted to establish New Medina Village, and that was the goal. So there was multiple New Medinas across the world, actually.
Okay, so you were born in Dominica.
Yes.
And in the ages of, let's say, elementary school and whatnot, where were you, or did you move around a couple of times?
Well, I was in Dominica up until I was about 4 years old. And then from there, we left and went to Trinidad and Tobago / St. Croix back and forth. So I probably moved to the States for the first time when I was about 6. Stayed in the States till about 8 in Georgia, actually.
Here in Atlanta?
Yes. Well, not in Atlanta. It was in North Georgia, in Tate, Georgia.
Tate, okay.
And then from Tate, Georgia, went to Belize for a year. And that was about 8 to 9. And then we returned to the United States, I want to say maybe 89. And then around 91, we moved to Honduras. And we were there till about 94 or 95. And then we came back to Georgia again. And again, that was to North Georgia.
And so you moved back in the 90s to Tate?
Yes.
And you've been here since?
No, actually moved back to St. Croix in 98. And I've been back here full time since 99. Okay. Back in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, so tell us what's it like as an African American growing up in these areas, but I guess in some ways you wouldn't be African American growing up there.
Well, I always say it's 50-50. People ask me where I'm from, and it's funny, I tend to pick places sometimes because it's a confusing story for some people. But I've been in the States half my life, I'd say. Pretty much half my life outside, 15 to 16 years outside of the States, and the rest of the time here. For me, it was normal. I think for my siblings, it was the same because that was our life. That's all we knew from birth. My father and his associates, the people who did travel with him, to these multiple locations. It was just, that was all we knew. We knew each other. We were all like family, and we really didn't know anybody outside of the group that well. It was our group, and when we were in the States, it was our family members, extended family members and whatnot. So for us, it was the norm. It wasn't until I got older that I realized, wait a minute, my childhood wasn't like everybody else's.
Yeah.
So.
Tell me about the group of the families around the New Medina project. How many?
Mainly, it was 3 core families: the Hamids, the Kabirs, and the Abdul Haqs. And Najib Abdul Haq, he was one of the founding members of the Islamic Party, along with my father. And then Masood Abdul Kabir and his family. They were the core group. Several other families came and went, but those 3 families were the ones that stuck it out together.
And they traveled to all these locations?
Traveled to all these locations together. Large families, very large families. I have 14 siblings. I think Brother Abdul Haq has between 7 and 9 children, I believe. And Brother Masood has, I want to say 15 to 16. Mm-hmm. So it was large groups.
And Brother Bayan, you've just opened a window for me onto a world that I don't really know a lot about. This is basically sort of African American Muslim diaspora and Caribbean and Central America, which is honestly someone could write a book about that, mashallah. So I'm really intrigued by the idea of New Medina. So can you tell me a little bit about, was there a masjid, was there a school, were you homeschooled?
I was homeschooled, I would say from birth up until 5th or 6th grade in Honduras, actually, was where the first time I went to a public school. And it was an American school down there. And then afterwards, I did go to high school in Atlanta. But sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Was there a masjid?
Yes, we had a masjid everywhere we went. We had a space that we rented, and we actually built a masjid in Tate, Georgia. So that's called Muzaffardin Mosque. It's still there on the property up there in Tate, Georgia. But we were mostly homeschooled in the places that we went to.
And it seems like you had enough siblings and enough people.
Oh yeah, the infrastructure was there.
Have enough of a schooling environment.
Exactly.
And who were the teachers?
Mostly our mothers. Our mothers were the teachers, and our fathers were the disciplinarians, of course. So.
And so the New Medina idea, you would travel to different places and search for property to build a larger society. Was that the idea? Was it?
Well, after the Islamic Party, and I don't like to say ended, but we can touch on that later. But during the Caribbean stage, and when my father did decide to leave the United States, New Medina was his vision. I like to tell people I was raised inside of my father's dream or his vision, and that's probably true for most children. But for us, it was a little more, I guess, I don't want to say extreme, but it was definitely different. And what his vision was, you bring families first. You buy property, a large piece of land. And you bring like-minded families together. And then you set the rules and the regulations on that property. And essentially what he wanted was to have a nation within a nation where Muslims could practice freely, where you're allowed to, you set the rules and the regulations for what you want in your society. So what he really wanted to do was set up a society within a society, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And, have as much autonomy as possible, religious freedom and whatnot. That was the goal.
What kind of occupations would the men in the group sort of deal with? I mean, how would they make a living?
Well, there were multiple businesses that we had. We've had restaurants. Mr. Abdul Kabir was a medical doctor, so that did bring in a lot of funding there. We also had different business ventures in these countries. There was also money coming in from different avenues that I'm not exactly familiar with, of course, but there were a lot of connections, so money was flowing.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, did you have a sense that, did your dad sit down and talk to you about the history of the Islamic Party and how he came to leave the mainland United States? Were there family conversations about history?
No, but I do know how he came to leave. His decision to leave was, he became more progressive as time went on. When they founded the community mosque, it was about community outreach and teaching indigenous Muslims about Islam, because at the time when they founded the community mosque around 1970 in Washington, D.C., there was one Islamic center, and it was an Islamic center / museum that was run by some immigrant Muslim groups. So that was actually the first masjid for indigenous Muslims in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you guys probably already know that. But as time went on, my father realized that he could only accomplish so much in America. And what he wanted to do was to find political climate or social climate where he could actually function at a greater level of autonomy. That's what he was looking for.
Well, tell us about the schooling environment. Was it an integration of Islamic materials? Were you learning your deen while you're getting off school?
Yes.
Like, how did you become a Muslim? Like, what kind of Muslim stuff did you do in Honduras?
Well, it really started, I'd say, in Tate, Georgia. We had a school on the bottom of the masjid. New Medina Academy, actually, is what it's called. Yeah, so, and we had Quranic studies, Islamic studies, Sunnah, and then your regular mathematics and science and things like that. Different sisters taught different subjects. Mm-hmm. We actually had a carpentry class that Brother Kamal, I don't know if you know Brother Kamal, Abdul Rahman, but that's my father's cousin. Okay. We had carpentry classes and things like that. So there was a curriculum. It was very well put together, I would say.
And were you learning Arabic language as well?
Yes, we did.
Like recitation?
Recitation. We had Quranic recitations in the masjid. We had a lot of functions where we would bring other Muslims from the city to come up and see what we were doing and, display the kids and this is what they're learning and things like that. So my father was always soliciting other families to come and join in the effort.
Joining the larger movement.
What was the timeline? So this is in Tate, Georgia?
Yes.
Is it like...
I would say the first wave in Tate was probably, I would say 85, because when we left Dominica, we went to DC for a while, and then we moved to Tate. I would say Tate was between 85 to 88, maybe 89, somewhere around there.
Okay. So what's it like? You said you went to public high school here in Atlanta at some point. What was that like? I mean,
Culture shock.
Yes.
Yeah, I was 14, 15 years old at the time, and it was major culture shock. You know, I had never been to an American school up until that point, and when we left Honduras, we moved back to Georgia, and we were told, hey, we're going to enroll you guys in high school here, and me and my brothers were like, really? You know, so it was definitely just a different experience. I mean, I think culture shock says it the best, but the influences that are out there, you know, they're real because we were sheltered to an extent. We had our freedom, you know, we would leave home in the morning, come home at night sometimes, but we were in a third world country, things were a little bit different. But coming back to the States in the mid 90s, is just a lot of things going on, and so we really had to, you know, stay on top of our dean to just keep on the right path, because it just really hit us like, bam, this is American society, this is what it's really like. And I had never experienced that before, so it was a big adjustment. Exactly. Cultural temptations, you know, women, drugs, sex, the whole 9 yards.
How did people react to you and your background? Was that?
Again, you know, I guess growing up, I always learned to be selective about what I tell people, because there's certain things certain people just aren't going to understand. But people really, you know, they thought we were different. It was obvious that we were different, but not in a bad way. It wasn't negative. It was just, you guys, just something about you guys that's just not like everybody else that I see, you know. And there were certain friendships that I did develop where I opened up to people and told them, and people were normally shocked, like, wow, really? Like, why did you come back here? That's normally what we get. You're here and you lived in all these beautiful places. What are you doing back in the States? That's normally what I would get.
So how many siblings were with you in terms of your spread of age? You said you have 14 siblings?
14 siblings.
So obviously some of those are going to be closer to you than others.
Right.
In some ways, and have shared life experiences.
Exactly.
Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, actually, I have my older sister, Salima Hamad. I say Hijra Hamad, Ikhlas Hamad. Do you want ages or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, I don't actually really know how they are right now. But, and then my two younger brothers, Hadi Hamad and Bakir Hamad, they were the two closest to me. And I have another brother, he was actually my stepbrother, Hamza Abdul Kabir. I would say those three guys, they were the closest to my age, and we were just really close in general. So we kind of went through a lot of experiences together.
And so they were in high school with you?
They were in high school with me, exactly. Well, two of them were.
Okay.
Yes. One of them was, but my younger brother back here, he's about 4 years younger than me, so he was in elementary school.
Would you say that, you know, growing up in the Caribbean and Central America, you know, you're African American, you're Muslim, you know, your dad has been part of a very, very important movement as far as the overall history of Islam in America. So I guess my question for you is, how did you kind of, you know, sort of integrate all these different identities, you know, living in all these different places? I mean, what was kind of like, what your core, what kept you really grounded, if that makes any sense?
My family. You know, we accepted the fact that we're traveling nomads. You know, even to today, I'll be honest with you, there are certain members of my family, even myself, we kind of have an identity crisis because we move so much. You know, yes, I'm American, but at the same time, I'm comfortable in any setting. You know, and then that was one of the benefits, actually, of having moved so much and experienced so many different cultures, is that I can sit down with a group of Puerto Ricans and I'm fine. I can sit down with a group of Japanese and I'm fine. I would say that we're extremely multicultural, and it's ingrained in us. You know, so I just roll with the flow. I mean, you can put me in any country and I could probably survive, to be honest with you. So, but my family, they kept me grounded. My mother, she's an amazing woman. After my father passed away, you know, I was almost 11 when my father died. So after that, you know, it was pretty much on my mother to, you know, raise the children and things like that. She did remarry, but she definitely kept us grounded and kept our identity, you know.
So if you were so young when this charismatic father of yours passed away, Allah yarhamhu, who carried really the sort of the flag of Islamic knowledge, of the mission of New Medina, that sort of vision? Because for a family that size, you're a social movement amongst yourself.
Right.
And so who in the family or who in the network, and carries that responsibility, and then what is the new vision? What directions has has the network sort of moved in?
Well, I would say that, after my father passed, his two closest brothers, Brother Masood Abdul Kabir and Najib Abdul Haq, they did their best to carry on the vision. But because it was such a personality-driven, thing, that I would say that was the beginning of the end of what my father was trying to achieve when he passed, because things just weren't the same without him being the central figure there. Moving to my father actually passed away in Honduras. He was on a trip there, trying to set things up for us to move there. So we wound up moving there after he passed away. And we stayed there for almost 4 years. And then once we moved back to the States, I would say that was the end of New Medina and then that vision, about 94, 95.
I see. And so in your own family, who's kept up with Islamic knowledge? I know that your brother is a scholar.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
So tell us a little bit about that. Maybe, has that had any influence on you and how your understanding of Islam?
Definitely. I mean, we don't talk as much as we used to, but he's always available. And I would say, if I do need to lean on somebody, he will be the first person that comes to mind. He actually, he buried my father with his own hands. He handled the janazah, the whole 9 yards. But he does, he lives in Colorado. We most of us live down here, so there is it's kind of a separation there. But of course, with phone and internet and things like that, he's always available. But I would say he would be the flag bearer as far as being progressive and active is my brother in the community.
One of the really interesting things about the Islamic Party and then the New Medina Project and the history of this network is that it really has been exposed and has appropriated ideas from so many different Muslim parts of so many different Muslim movements,
right?
So many different ideologies, right? Different orientations. And so what we know about in terms of the public available information is sort of your father's exposure to groups like Jamaat al-Islami,
yes.
the Ikhwan.
And yes,
it really comes through in the literature, right?
Right.
But then we also know about a whole group of associates, your brother, other family members, adopting to Shia later. Can you say anything about the history of that? Because that's not as clear. When does that happen in the New Medina world? Did you grow up exposed to a certain brand of Islam over other brands, or how does that work?
I would say we grew up. No.
People don't like these labels, right?
And I don't, because I don't label myself.
I don't like it myself either, and I don't myself either. I mean, I'm here, but I met you in a different context.
Well, exactly.
So there's obviously these areas that are difficult to deal with, but when push comes to shove, there's certain issues, right? And there's certain exposure moments, right?
Right.
And there's certain rituals, there's certain different things.
Right.
So can you jog your memory to tell us a little bit about that?
I would say there was somewhat of an evolution. I mean, I would say starting early. I don't know. Again, I don't like labels, but you could say we were just a traditional Sunni family. But over the years, and in the leadership in our group, they were seekers. They were just seeking the truth wherever it was. My father, during the Islamic Revolution in Iran, my father had some connections in there, and he actually was getting a lot of information sent to him, from Shia sources and whatnot that he was very interested in. That's actually how my brother, Idris, that's actually how he became a Shia, was because, he's a mad genius. Anyway, so my father would give him being the firstborn, my father didn't have time to read all this information. He would give it to my brother and say, hey, read this, tell me what it's about. And he was just feeding him information. And that's actually how he became a Shia through that avenue. But we were seekers of the truth. We didn't label ourselves to say I'm this kind of Muslim or that kind of Muslim, or we just wanted to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was the goal. And it's interesting too, my father was actually buried as a Shia, even though he never practiced it. He never actually practiced it, but he was actually buried as a Shia because my brother did the janazah. So that's just a little interesting piece of history.
The network became, Shia?
No, I would say some of the founding members did, particularly those who stayed in St. Croix. But maybe it's 50-50. But a lot of people, once the group disbanded, people kind of just went different ways. So.
Can you talk about, because I've read about Amir Muzaffar ad-Din, and I've had interviews where people speak of him as this very kind of charismatic leader. with very strong political views and
Extremely strong.
very particular ideas about how to establish Islam in the U.S. But I'd like you to talk more about him as a dad.
Okay. I mean, he was a good father. And something a lot of people don't know, everything that he did for his children. And he made that clear. He wanted his children to grow up in the best Islamic environment possible. That was his motivation. Changing the society and those kind of things were important, but the motivation was protecting his children from the dangers and the traps that are out there. And that's, again, going back to New Medina Village, he wanted to be able to raise his children in a large area by his rules, his regulations, which were, of course, based upon the Quran and the Sunnah. So that was his true motivation, was protecting his family.
It's amazing because I've got a friend right now who's building a hydroponics farm in the south of the city, right? And the idea of Muslims, there's a new Hijra society. This idea of sort of African American Muslims establishing their own society, their own subculture, their own sort of place where they could really pursue self-determination. It's amazing to see how many projects and attempts have been made about this.
There's been several, and to continue to answer your question, yeah, I mean he was fun at home. He was just dad, Again, it wasn't until I got older that I realized, wait a minute, my dad wasn't like everybody else's dad either, But dad is dad. He was fun. He traveled a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember him being gone a lot, but when he was there, he was playing with the kids, taking us out to ice cream, working us to death on the property, things like that. So he was a great father. He was an amazing man, actually.
So tell us, what do you think about now you've gotten us through sort of the encounter with America in high school, your exposure as a child. Now you're realizing that you didn't have the most normal childhood, but you're able to navigate the world in a way that other people can't. So tell us about sort of you now as an adult, as a man, navigating your life these days, and sort of coming over the last 15 years. What have things been like? Well,
for me, I have 5 children.
Okay.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So, for me, I guess there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my childhood and my family, because I know that it's helped me. And it's helped me in ways, in the workplace, socially, because I'm able to navigate, pretty easily through situations because of my multicultural background. And being inspired by my father and his example, he was a very charismatic, charming guy, and I like to say that I inherited some of that. So, I'm always aware of how I was raised. I thank my mother all the time because we are somewhat unique, and I'm aware of it. I'm open about it. That's just my thoughts and feelings about myself. But we are a unique group of people, because how many people can say that they were raised literally around the world, and we were raised literally around the world. A certain generation of us, anyway. The younger generation, they've more. I had a few siblings that were born in Honduras, but the remaining were born here. But the older generation of the children, we had an amazing experience.
And so
looking back,
you felt like it's helped you get through.
Definitely.
So what's your post-high school career like? Did you pursue a college degree? Did you, what kind of work are you?
I'm lean certified to the University of Michigan. I'm in the manufacturing sector.
Okay.
Yes, and lean is just my job is to. Okay, all right, okay, cool.
I know.
All right, great.
Go ahead and say what lean is.
Well, lean is just the elimination of waste through continuous improvement. So what I do is I pretty much remove the waste and help the company be as profitable as possible. And I've been in manufacturing for I think 15 years now.
Oh, really?
And yeah, supervisor, manager level. So that's what I do.
company?
Right now I'm working for Rico Electronics.
Okay.
Office automation equipment, fax machines, copiers, printers, things like that.
Okay, good. So that's what you've been doing for the last 15 years.
Not for Rico, but I've been in the manufacturing sector for the last 15 years, yes.
Very good. And so you have 5 children. How many boys? How many girls?
4 boys, 1 girl.
Okay. I thought I had it up with 3.
Yeah.
Over here in whining.
And once you get to 4, it's all the same after that. So a lot of noise.
I want to take us back, if we can, for a minute to growing up, in the West Indies in Honduras. Did you experience any issues of sort of racial discrimination or any racial tension between, because, obviously the populations in these countries are so ethnically diverse,
Yes,
right?
yes, they are.
But what kind of tensions existed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And they were minimal, because, and that's one of my biggest criticisms about America is, hyphenated Americanism. I'm an African American, this person's an Asian American, this person's a Hispanic American. And these other countries, if you're a Honduranian, you're a Honduranian. And that's that. If you're a Dominican, you're a Dominican, and that's that. If you're from Belize, you're from Belize. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. Of course, there's tension everywhere. But I would say that it was minimal, and I didn't experience any, particularly in Honduras because we were there for such a large span of time, almost 4 years. I didn't see any racial tension. It wasn't until I got back to the States and, in high school, and then it's like, wow, okay, I'm definitely back in America now, and the tensions were definitely evident then.
And were there other Muslims in Honduras, in Belize,
Yes, there were. Honduras has actually pretty large I think they have the largest population of immigrant Muslims in Central America. So we did connect with some of the other Muslims there. We did dawah. We actually, not my father, sorry, but the brothers that were down there, they did some shahadas while we were there. We passed out Qurans and things like that to the indigenous population. But yeah, there were Muslims there.
How were Muslims kind of perceived by the rest of the community?
Different, but I don't think anybody really pried too much. There was not a lot of knowledge about Islam. People knew who Muslims were, but people didn't know anything about Islam. And there's an interesting story I can tell you. Actually, when we were in Honduras, there's an indigenous African population where they're descendants of slaves, and they actually live. I forget exactly what part of the country, but they're not directly connected to the rest of the society. And we went out there, they're called the Garifuna is what they're called. And we actually went out to a Garifuna village, and we met a family there, and they were Muslims. And they had been Muslims for generations, and a lot of the knowledge was lost. But they had Qurans, they made salat and whatnot. They barely spoke Spanish because they did have their own kind of lingo. But they were actually Muslims, and we actually took this guy in, and we brought him to our home and things like that. But that was actually amazing.
Those are pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing. To go to a remote village in the middle of nowhere in Honduras and find people practicing Islam who really have no direct connection to the rest of the world. It was amazing.
Ivan Van Sertima wrote that book. What is it called? They Came Here Before Columbus, about African Muslims traversing the Atlantic and arriving before Christopher Columbus. And it's not sort of an idea that's really been embraced by mainstream historians, but what you're saying is so intriguing because there's a professor at State, Dr. Fuller, who has gone to Honduras, and he's really convinced that West Africans reached Honduras.
Wow.
Wow. So
Really?
Before Columbus, so it's really intriguing that and they're called Garifuna?
Garifuna, yes, Garifuna.
Very fascinating.
Yep.
What language? Was it an African language they were speaking?
It's. I would say it's probably a mixture of Spanish and an African language, and many of them do speak Spanish. They're known for arts and crafts, making breads and things like that, selling them in the towns. But they have their own kind of society that they stick to.
Sounds similar to like a Gola.
Exactly. That's a great comparison. That is a great comparison.
On then?
Yeah, I was actually not. One of the film festivals I was nominated in, the person whose documentary showed before mine was specifically on Honduras and the Garifuna.
Oh, wow.
So when he said that name, I'm like,
Yeah.
They live in small villages.
It's very small villages, yes.
Society.
Yep.
So let's see, how are we doing for time? Because I know that we need to wrap up around, what would we say, about 5:15ish? Between 5 and 5:15.
Yeah, I think we're good for about 10 more minutes.
I have a question.
You go.
So, I don't know whether our boss will approve, but I'm going to get this in here. So you have this sense of culture shock coming back to the States. So I'm kind of really, I understand what you're saying because I lived overseas, except it was in the Middle East, and
Right.
I kind of had to figure out, who am I really? You go overseas, and it's like, you look Arab, but you're a little bit different, and then it's sort of. And then you come back to the States, of course, and you're seen as totally other. But
Right.
How did September 11? I mean, how did that impact you? Did it have any impact on you?
It did definitely had an impact. I think it had an impact on any Muslim or anybody, in this country. And I remember that day clearly. I got off work, I went home, picked up my son from daycare, came home, turned the TV on, and saw what was going on. And I was extremely saddened and troubled. And at that point there wasn't a lot of information, the day that it happened. But later on, when we found out, supposedly who did it and all of that, it's to me there's no place for certain acts in Islam. And that's supported by the Quran and the Sunnah. You look at what's going on in the Middle East today, suicide bombings and whatnot. It's just, that's not something that I agree with or condone, and it saddens me because that becomes the face of Islam to those who have no knowledge that this is a religion of truth and peace. So 9/11 was the beginning of a lot of problems for the Ummah, as we all know, and how it happened, why it happened, I don't think we'll ever know the truth behind that. But what's happened afterwards is just very troubling and saddening to me.
Right now, sort of living in the wake of that moment, there's something of a kind of a Muslim renaissance in America,
right,
and in the UK, and it's amazing to me that so much of what we're talking about in our community work these days are some of the very same issues that the New Medina Project was talking about, that the community mosque was talking about, that all these different organizations in the 60s and 70s were talking about. As somebody who's really embodied that history, if you had a platform, Revival of the Islamic Spirit, or at the ICNA convention or something,
right,
because your father, Alayhi Rahma, was there, speaking about these things,
right,
to figures, and it's almost like the debates are happening all over again.
I agree.
If you had that platform today, what would you tell, somebody here, the students here at Medina Institute? And I don't know, it's kind of a conversation I'd like to have with you off camera, even. You know what I mean?
Right. Now, we'll tell them specifically.
Yeah, you inherited this history of the attempt to revive the Islamic Ummah.
Right.
That was an intellectual movement. That was a social movement.
Right.
And we are where we are today, and we always feel like we haven't ever done anything.
Right.
And that the Muslims haven't done anything. They don't have anything going on. What would you say if you had a platform at ICNA? What would your speech be?
I would tell them, that's a good question. One, don't be afraid to be different. My father had a thing that he would always say, do your best to influence society, because society is doing everything it can to influence you. And anytime you're in the society, you want to be the best face in the society. And that's something I tell my children all the time. If you're in a group, be the best person in that group. Don't succumb to the pressures of the group. Never lower your moral and spiritual standards for a group. And I feel, being a young Muslim in this country, they have it pretty hard. There's a lot of pressures out there, social pressures, the media. There's just so much garbage out there, and it's impossible to keep it out. If you have a television in your home, you've got garbage in your home. I try my best to filter things for my children. We mute commercials, change the channels, things like that. But still, I know that things are seeping through. Don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to be strong, and always be the leader in the group. That's what I would tell the younger generation. Believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, study the Sunnah, study the Prophet's life. Do your best to model that and take that out to the society, and never lower your standards. Never let your guard down. That's what I would say.
Exactly. Okay. There's kind of some points of information I want to get that I want to ask you about. Some of the biggest dawah that the Islamic Party have done was in some of the islands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some places there were sort of old subcontinent Muslims already there, Indian Muslims there. There were places, there were folks from all kinds of different backgrounds on those islands. But I know that there was a lot of dawah that was done by the Islamic Party there. When the Islamic Party becomes New Medina, are there interactions between New Medina and some of those groups that the Islamic Party had done dawah to?
There definitely was.
What were the networks like between the indigenous or pre-existing Muslim communities in the Caribbean and New Medina or the Islamic Party? Anything you could weigh in on that?
I'd say my father, he was big on outreach. But at the same time, he wasn't afraid to do his own thing. So he did step on a lot of toes over the years. So, we did have certain situations where other groups were willing to work with us, but at the same time, being so as convicted as he was, if he sensed that something was deviant, then he wasn't afraid to say, hey, we're gonna do our thing, we're gonna build our group. He actually had to have bodyguards a lot of the time in his life because people wanted to really get at him for pulling members out of their groups. This happened in DC, this happened in Trinidad. And it was some pretty tense moments that happened because of interactions with other groups. So I'd say, some of it was good and some of it was obviously bad.
I have a question. This question is sort of, I was actually thinking, I think we're on the same wavelength. Sometimes when you've traveled a lot as a child, you've had this kind of unconventional schooling and education, sometimes you find yourself making decisions that are quite different for your own family. In my case, I've become probably a lot more sort of homebound than my parents, because they really kind of, mashallah, they love to travel. They have wanderlust for sure. But would you ever think about relocating your family to Dominica or kind of like establishing your own kind of,
who chose that question?
Your new Medina? Would you see yourself doing that?
That's actually my goal. I actually returned from Dominica on Monday.
Cool.
Yeah. We took a trip last week. We were down there, and my goal is actually to move my family to Dominica, inshallah, within the next 2 to 3 years. Like it's again, you mentioned wanderlust. It's in my blood. I love to travel. I love to fly. It's all I've done. If I sit still for 2 to 3 years, I go crazy. I have to take a trip somewhere. I have to get out of the country from time to time. It's just my nature. It's who I am. So yeah, I'm actually planning to relocate my family to the island of Dominica, where I was born, within the next 2 to 3 years. Okay. So because I want them to have the experience. My kids are typical American Muslim kids, and I want them to have a taste of what I experienced. And I think most parents kind of want that for their kids, but I want them to definitely benefit from, expanding their horizons in the sense that, hey, the world is bigger than just America. The world is bigger than just the town and city that I live in. I think it would do them some good.
I've seen there's some beautiful pictures you've posted on Facebook of the ocean.
Oh, okay, all right. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forget you were a friend.
Of course, anybody would like to go back.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
What kind of Islamic goals do you have for your children?
Oh, man, I mean, as far as Islamic education goes, that's actually part of the goal of moving to Dominica. My brother and I, we want to start a masjid down there. Okay. Because the community, it hasn't really grown. There is a masjid, it's a very small masjid, very small community. My brother was born and raised there, actually. So we actually want to start an Islamic school. Of course, my children would be there. They're going to public school now. Mm-hmm. But the goal is to move there and to, not to rejuvenate anything that my father did, but to kind of do our own thing. But we both love that country. So, yeah, that's all part of the plan. This is my younger brother, yes.
I think I met him the other evening. Was he there or no?
No, he wasn't. He lives in Chicago.
Did you have a brother with you there?
I had, it
I
was...
want to say you had a younger brother.
Yeah, no, he wasn't my brother. He wasn't my brother, but yeah, Sadiq, yeah, he was with me.
I want to give anybody a chance to ask any questions before we wrap up. Do you have a question to me you want to throw in there, Aisha?
Wow. Can you talk a little bit more about the, I don't know, it was interesting that you mentioned about 9/11 because I had a personal experience here in the States. At the time I was in high school and I was playing basketball and I was covering, and so can you talk a little bit more about how that affected you and where you were in terms of were you in high school?
No, I was working. I think I was 21 at that point. My son had just been born a year prior. But I mean, in the workplace, I want to say I was one of maybe a few Muslims at our company. Of course, that spurred a lot of questions, and I actually had a guy come up to me and say, hey, Bayan's such a nice guy. I couldn't see him strapping a bomb to himself and blowing up and killing anybody. Mm-hmm. And he was a Christian, known Christian guy. So I told him, yeah, you're such a nice guy too. I couldn't see you hanging and lynching or, torturing or killing anybody, as a retort. But, excuse me. That's a big conversation to have, post 9/11.
Did you feel inclined to almost protect the Muslim women in the community more? Because I know that when you cover, you represent Islam.
Exactly.
And there's no escaping that. So
Definitely. And there were actually, some sisters who were my employees at that time that I actually had to stick up for a couple of times because, I did encounter some tension in the workplace and in society in general. But again, like you said, men, we can kind of slide through.
Right.
But for women, you guys, it's obvious. So definitely had to stick up for a couple of people. Definitely had to go to management about a few things, that were being said. Because, we were all targeted at that point and on some form or another.
And you're here in Atlanta too, right?
Right. Yeah, and the South is not the place to be. Yes.
¿Hablas español?
Sí, hablo español.
La gente en Dominica, pobre, porque la gente aquí siempre cree cuando la gente es pobre es mal.
We'll see.
Porque aquí siempre la gente murió porque es pobre. Pero allá, y yo sé en the Caribbean, cuando la gente es pobre, siempre tiene sonrisa.
Sí, están feliz.
Sí,
Están feliz.
Sí, pero aquí no.
Aquí no.
Explica eso, pero en inglés.
Okay. What he was asking me, the poor people in Dominica and in third world countries, he's saying poor people here, they tend to be, I guess, unhappy or, because money is everything in America. Let's let me get that out of the way. Without money, it's hard to have a good time. Without money, you don't eat. Without money, but in these other societies where the majority of the people are poor, they measure wealth differently. Your family, your health. We were just in Dominica last week. You see people who have nothing, literally living in a rundown shack, picking their food every day, fishing for their dinner, healthy as an ox. Ripped, never worked out a day in their life. But they understand that happiness doesn't just come from money. Yes, there's problems, there's social problems. We do need some form of income. But there are people there who have, 60, 70 years old, never really had a real job in their life, but they're some of the most pleasant, peaceful, happy people that you ever meet. And then that's a big difference between, America and Western world in general versus some of these third world countries where the social pressures of buy this, buy that, you have to have this, you have to have that. If you don't wear this shirt, you're nothing. A lot of those social pressures aren't there. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. And that's one of the things that I'm actually finding that a lot of African Americans specifically, when they go to places like Latin America, especially in the Caribbean and around Central America, they're finding that when you look at the scope of maps, most people that are poor or come from a poor background, they never get to meet other poor people.
That's right.
Even people, foreigners that come to America, for the most part, the people that came here, other than refugees, they came here, and those are the people that were in the wealthy class
Exactly.
of the country.
Exactly.
You never truly meet. It's not more so racism when they come here. They know when they come here that African Americans is the poor class of America.
Right.
So why would I blend with the poor class when I would never do that in my own country?
Right.
So take out racism. But when you, as an African American, go to a third world country, you fit right in.
Right in. You nailed it. You nailed it.
Totally different.
You nailed it. You fit right in.
And that's what I'm seeing, that including myself and most other African Americans, once they travel and they go to those third world countries, especially in Latin America and Caribbean, they don't want to come back.
You're right. I didn't want to come back. She didn't want to come back. That was her first trip out of the country. And
I was scared at first at some of the areas that he would take me to. I'm like, lock my doors. But by the time we finished, I was just fine and normal, and they were, like you said, pleasant people, really nice people.
And my father, he steered us towards the common people. He was a man of the common people. We would move these places, and we would be in the society. It wasn't, we're foreigners, we're going to live on top of this mountain and look down at. No, we were in the thick of it, dealing with people, out in the marketplaces, out in the cities. And so I just, we just blended well.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned nation within a nation concept. Was there any kind of significant conversations that happened regularly about this kind of ideology from members, obviously not your father after a certain point, but that kind of.
Yes, there was. There was actually. We all knew what was going on. I mean, they were very open about it. They were very open about the traps that are out there in society and why we're doing the things that we're doing. It was never pack your bags, we're moving to this island tomorrow. It was always, this is where we're moving, this is why we're moving. You know, they were very open, and you know, they were really focused on educating us.
What did the conversation sound like? I'm just curious.
As a child, you know, it was more, hey, we're gonna move and this is why we're moving, you know, but they always had a game plan. You know, I would say at the parental level, I guess, or the people, you know, who were behind the moves, they always had a game plan. It was, you know, we're gonna move here. What are the business opportunities? What's the political climate like? There was a lot of research that went into it. You know, brothers would fly out and go scout the area and things like that. So it was a lot of time and effort that went into research before we ever made a move.
Was there an Islamic undertone, meaning in terms
Always.
of
Always. You know, my father was very progressive in his beliefs. He always said that, you know, the 5 pillars, you know, that's the foundation. But if you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, and what he had to go through, and as far as in the society and fighting against the injustices and sticking up for the poor and the downtrodden, that's what my father was about. You know, it was never just, let's just go to the mosque and pray. You know, it's let's go to the mosque and let's plan, you know, how we're going to impact society and uplift the people who are at the bottom. He was all about uplifting Muslim and non-Muslim. It was never just, I want to help Muslims. It's, I want to help the downtrodden and the poor people of the world. That was his mission.
Like the oppressed people of the world.
Exactly. We had songs and anthems and the whole 9 yards.
Is that
But
right?
that's, oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any? I mean, it's not for the conversation here, but songs, anthems.
I can get you all those things.
Is that
And you know, we as children, certain things were adopted from the Islamic Party. Like they had the Believer's Pledge, Allah is our Lord, Muhammad is our guide, Sunnah is our ideal, Jihad is our means, salvation is our end. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, okay. And then also, and I don't want to sing here, but no, I'm not. But as children, you know, and I forget what we call this, but it's something that's tattooed on my heart. It's, for me, the Islamic movement is the very purpose of my life. My life is dedicated to it, and my death will also be in pursuit of this purpose. Others may follow it or may not. In all circumstances, this will be my choice, and I'll give my life for it. Even if not a single individual steps forward, I will yet do so. If none accompanies me, I will walk alone. If the entire world unites to oppose me, I'll contend with it single-handed, undaunted. And we sang that on a weekly basis.
That was actually a song.
Was it? Okay.
Okay. No, I'm asking you. It was a song.
It was a song. Well, they turned it into a song. It was more of a pledge, but they turned it into a song for the kids. But I didn't want to sing it, so. Yeah,
No, that's
yeah.
fine.
Okay, yeah.
It's on the papers. It's on the papers, and that's why,
Okay.
Because I wrote about it. It's
Oh, okay, wow.
So it's amazing to hear the social context of that pledge because
Right.
you see it on the paper.
Right.
And you know that this has a social life. But
Right.
to hear you explain that, thank you for that.
Yeah, we all knew it, and you know, again, it's tattooed on my heart. You
You're
know.
going to Dominican, so I mean,
Exactly.
you're still with that.
Right.
You know, and that's so.
Right.
Well, jazakallah khair for your time.
Well, thank you.
Today, it really means a lot to us that you were able to share that with
Well, I was honored. I mean, I'm really honored to be here, and I've been looking forward to doing something like this for a long time. So thank you for giving me an avenue.
Absolutely.
I have to say also jazakallah khair, and I'm just grateful.